this session will be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please turn off your camera, and you can put things in the chat.
Good afternoon. I'm Latoya Ricketts, Housing Development Specialist, Assistant Director for CSD. Thank you.
So with that, we'll proceed to our next slide.
So thank you, Renee and Candace. So on behalf of our Executive Director, Dr. Adrian Holloway, welcome to the Harris County Affordable Rental Housing Program request for application for our third round of funding. This virtual public meeting will be put forth to provide you information regarding submittal of application. As I mentioned before, I'm Latoya Ricketts, the Assistant Director of Housing Development and Special Initiatives. So on behalf of our community service department, consists of multiple offices and divisions under the Housing and Community Development Office, led by Mr. Renee Martinez, our Chief Housing Community Development Officer. Also, we have our Community Services Office, which is led by Mr. Martin Negron. And we also have our Operations Division Office, which is led by Ms. Anita Green. Our Finance Office is led by Mr. Craig Atkinson. So funding opportunities are made available to the county through Harris County Community Service under the Community Services Division. Development staff are responsible for the application process, for the release of application through the notification of the award. So just take this time to listen to the information, pose your question together, and we will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Latoya. We have in front of you the RFA process. It is a fairly short process. It closes on June the 16th. We will have all of this information posted and any questions that are asked, and then any addendums even as we proceed. Next slide, please. The allocations are subject to change. We have home funds in the amount of $2 million under CHODO, Home American Rescue Plan funding. And Don Hughes will elaborate on that further in the amount of $8.5 million, $23 million under our remaining CDBG DR Round 2 Affordable Rental Program, CDBG entitlement funding in the amount of $2 million. Next slide, please. Here are some links associated with understanding our various programs and requirements. Next slide, please. Our HUD and CSD regulations and standards are described below. Please make note of these types of requirements because when we review these projects, we have to assure that they meet various thresholds, also including site and neighborhood characteristics and other guidance as it relates to these different programs. Next slide, please. These are the worker provision policies. We do have representatives from our Department of Economic Equity and Opportunity with us as well. These types of requirements will be built into our loan agreements with our prospective subrecipients and borrowers. Next slide, please. The program overview consists of a priority on construction and acquisition ready projects. I can't stress enough that we have a very short window, particularly associated with our CDBG DR program. The program will end in August of 2024, and as a result, we will be prioritizing projects that are ready to go from a construction standpoint, or it could be an acquisition rehab. It would be structured in a way that we are certain that we would be utilizing funds in this period. Our current record on some of our CDBG-DR projects has been that some have sought even 6-month extensions, that we just simply don't have that length of time anymore. So with this is site selection criteria, the service area, the leverage. This is a reimbursement program. It does mean that projects have to have the financing in place, site control, et cetera, in order to really access our programs and any other special requirements. Next slide, please. Below are our eligibility criteria, particularly with the use of CDBG or CDBG disaster recovery funding. There is a minimum of 51% of the units that would be assisted. We use that term. It really comes from HUD Home. And typically our land use and regulatory agreement is a 20-year period. We have eligibility under nonprofits, for-profits, municipalities, housing authorities, other local governments. Development must be located in Harris County, but outside the city of Houston. Where we do partner on this would be a city and a county joint homelessness rental housing type project. The caveat here is unless the city of Houston has already made some determination if they will be funding a program, I don't know where we will be on a homelessness related project that would have joint funders. Maximum award under CDBG-DR is $25 million per project and 25% leverage based on this as well. Next slide, please. Our priorities, as I indicated a little earlier, are shovel-ready, multifamily or single-family rental housing projects. The project has to be in a point where we're not waiting on design plans for, let's say, 6 months to a year. It really needs to be a project that can proceed quickly. Acquisition rehab are opportunities. We also have development non-congregate shelter, and we'll get into that a little bit more with respect to home ARPA, or home ARP, I mean. Rental housing, as I said, that are part of an existing homeless housing services campus. And then rental housing under home ARP that we'll get into a little bit more detail on. Thank you. Next slide, please. So our service area is primarily outside the city of Houston. We also have cities that we have cooperative agreements as well. And listed below is the link relative to our concentration policy as well as it relates to multi and single family rental housing. Next slide, please. And then this is our service area and our what we describe as our target areas. So as you can see, there's different locations in here relative our precincts and then also our service area. Next slide, please. And then these are specifically for HUD home funds, the 12 cooperative cities that we work with listed below. Next slide, please. And then this is our affordable housing site selection criteria, specifically with respect to any CDBG-DR investment. And we will be reviewing proposals. They'll go through a threshold. They'll also go through a further vetting. And then the way that we will look at this is what funding sources seem to make the most sense for these projects. So we have minority concentration criteria, we have poverty concentration criteria, crime incident criteria. There's also site and neighborhood characteristics, both positive features as well as negative features, including location in an area that has strong services. What does that mean? Retail, health, parks, job centers. Negative features include adjacency to industrial uses, salvage yards, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, other negative or undesirable land uses. Next slide, please. And then this is a map indicating our areas that we consider higher opportunity than areas of economic revitalization as well. We also have concerted revitalization areas, and so those are described in the blue outline described on this map. And please pay close attention to the application where it describes some of the ranking, prioritization, and qualification associated with this RFA. Next slide, please. This is information related to CHODOs. CHODOs are a special designation associated with the HUD home program. We can describe further information in questions. And if there is an entity that's a nonprofit that is seeking a CHODO designation. Next slide, please. Or has a CHODO designation. Home ARP, this is the new program under the Biden administration. Don, can you elaborate further on this?
Okay, just give me 1 second. Am I unmuted? I'm not.
Yeah, no, you're on. I can hear you.
Right. So the Home ARP program, Home ARP, under the American Rescue Plan, the Biden administration provided $5 billion to assist individuals who are homeless, at risk of homeless, or other vulnerable populations. Of that $5 billion, HUD provided Harris County with $16.5 million. The key to the Home ARP or ARP program is that it is strictly, actually not strictly, let me take that back. 70% of the funds must go toward populations who fit into this qualified population. Again, at risk of homeless, domestic violence, populations who are at risk of housing instability, veterans, and other groups who are experiencing homelessness. And the eligible activities run the range. A majority of the funds must go toward permanent supportive housing or other types of services provided to the qualified populations, and provision of those services for those populations. We can go further into detail in the question section if you have more questions about this funding source.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. Next slide, please. So leverage. On our projects, we require that the project includes 25% of leverage. And some of you on this virtual Teams meeting, I know that you've worked with us in the past, and there's a Excel file that essentially lays out the various categories such as soft costs, construction, developer financing, various other types of elements that gets to the total development cost. Well, that would be on the Harris County side of that tab. Then there's also the other leverage, which is funding that the organization that we work with brings to the table as well. We can go into more detail in response to any questions and what we place on our website. Next slide, please. Special requirements is we just can't stress enough about that. We have to have projects that are ready to go. Even our CDBG entitlement funding has requirements with respect to our timeliness. And so we have ADA standards, including sensory impaired, mobility impaired units that have to be required. Please pay special attention to our minimum property standards that require elevators. I know that we've gone back and forth on some projects about the installation of elevators. TDHCA may not require that, but Harris County, as in our minimum property standards, definitely requires that. So there's additional consideration for units above and beyond a 5% for mobility impaired and 2% for sensory impaired. Broadband infrastructure, the rent requirements. So we have 80% of median and we have below that. So we have different income bands, even reaching down to 30% of median, which typically would be associated with a household having a voucher for that unit. Next slide, please. So roles, we have Housing Development Special Initiative Division, and then we also have Grants Management. So Latoya leads Housing Development Special Initiative. So that means developing the contracts, working closely during the financing calls that involves various parties. We play an active role in monitoring construction. We work with also our own consultants involved in construction management. We likely will have someone that's involved also in supporting DBRA in Section 3. After a project or really 6 months before a project is completed, we work on a coordinating handoff with our grants management division that will then be doing long-term compliance. There is also housing quality standards inspections that occur and also GLO inspections based on the type of funding that we bring in. When we do get to construction completion, every single unit will be inspected for HQS, and sometimes invariably these units will fail. We hope that we have a minimal number of units that do fail on the back end. And then grants management will be involved in the long-term compliance with annual compliance of that. Next slide, please. Fair housing. I'm just going to basically work through these. These are requirements that everybody has to follow with respect to the HUD funding associated with this program. Next slide, please. Again, further details on what fair housing is. It's really a very important aspect of the work that we do in relation to receiving and accepting the HUD funds and assuring that all developers and property management companies are fully following anything related to fair housing. Next slide, please. We also do put a provision in our loan agreements associated with the acceptance of housing vouchers. That is a given in any agreement that we execute. Next slide, please. Again, equal access and further fair housing information. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, contractor procurement. So we may require the procurement of all contractors and subcontractors through an open and competitive process. Also, we assure that procurement occurs in a open and fair competition and is consistent with 2 CFR 200. We also now have a county federal procurement policy. So procurement is, and it goes all the way into reviewing change orders. We have our consultants in place that review change orders that we have to also comply with those provisions associated with the negotiation of profit, cost analysis. So there's various information we can share in more detail once we get to that point of an award. Next slide, please. Gary, you're on. Are you on? Is Ernie on and your team on?
Sure. This is Gary. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Gary Greer. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Department of Equity and Economic Opportunity. We call it the DEEO. And my team will be monitoring HUD Section 3 compliance. HUD Section 3 is been around since 1968. The purpose is to the greatest extent feasible that economic opportunities such as of this opportunity be directed to low and very low income persons who are recipients of HUD housing with a preference for both what's called targeted workers, and we'll talk about that in just a second, and the service area of the neighborhood where the development is seated. In order for it to be a Section 3 covered project, the project itself must have community development funds of over 200,000. Next slide, please. These are some of the requirements of HUD Section 3 as amended by CFR 24 Part 75, which we're going to refer to as the final new rule. There were changes implemented last year under Section 3 to take the focus from new hires and subcontracting opportunities towards a sustained employment for low income, what we call Section 3 workers and Section 3 targeted workers. These requirements extend to the recipient, the subrecipient, the general contractor, and all subcontractors of any covered project. The next slide, please. So herein are the benchmarks which the program will need to reach, and this is what we'll be checking for compliance. that 25% of the total labor hours for the project are worked by an employee of a Section 3 business, a youth build participant, or someone below the 80% area median income. For the current year, it is $44,350 per year annum, but it is going to change June 1st, and it's making a big jump. So the new amount will be $49,600, and we'll work with the contractors to identify those folks. There's also a provision that 5% of the total labor hours worked by the project or in the project be by these Section 3 workers, targeted workers, and that requires them to be part of a Section 3 business. There's a special definition for a Section 3 business, which changed from what was called the legacy rule. And then a youth build participant will qualify, and also a service area resident who lives within the 1 mile radius of the project. Next slide. So the DEO will also monitor our MWBE program. My colleague, Derek Holmes, will be our lead on this. And as you can see, these are the requirements under MWBE on this slide. And now at this time, Renee, I think I'm going to pass it over to Maria Rodriguez to talk about the DBRA slide.
And Gary, before you do that, I want to emphasize that we believe that our round 3 will be subject to MWBE construction goals. That I assume is something that we'll clarify with DEO and with Derek, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can y'all hear me? This is Maria Rodriguez, and I am the Senior Program Manager for DBRA. Davis-Bacon requires all contractors and subcontractors performing work on fairly funded projects in an excess of $2,000 to pay their laborers and mechanics not less than the prevailing wage and fringes. Employers must be paid according to the wage decision. There is no exception. In addition to that, there's additional requirements. As you can see on the bullet, we require weekly certified pay reports, and that is required through the duration of the project from the general contractor and any subcontractor and lower tier subcontractors working on these federally funded projects. In addition to that, I also want to let everyone know that expect random field interviews. We do go on site to interview workers to ensure that documentation submitted is per our regulations and they're staying in compliance. The general contractor is also responsible for the full compliance of their subcontractors. And the other thing that I would like to let everyone know, is to ensure that the general contractor has site control and there are no unknown lower tier subcontractors. That usually tends to be the case. So I wanted to stress that out. And does anyone have any questions?
We're going to hold them till the end, Maria.
That's right. Yes, sir. Thank you, Renee.
All right. Thank you. So Candace, I think you're up next.
Yes. Hi. All right. So now we're going to go into the application review portion of the meeting. I will keep it very brief so that we can leave plenty of time for questions. All right, let's get started. Okay, so here is the application scoring matrix here. So for each exhibit is your assigned category, A through F, and here's the points that you're able to obtain for a maximum score of 105 points. Here's the instructions tab. This gives you what sources of funding, when the application is due, and then as Renee mentioned earlier, we also have the priorities for round 3 outlined here. This is the application quick reference guide. What you will find here is your pretty much every question that you could think of would be outlined in this particular guide, front to back. So as you're going through and completing the application, we encourage you to read the instructions carefully, review your application checklist, and make sure everything is complete. For this particular slide, I want to point out that we will need 2 hard copies, 2 originals, and 1 electronic copy of the application and budget forms. And also we will need a flash drive, bookmark and tab PDF, each section. This is the application checklist. If you've already had an opportunity to review the application, you'll note 5 hard copies are listed here. However, we're going to request 2 hard copies and 1 electronic copy here. In addition, your phase 1 will be also required on a disk or flash drive, and all of your hard copies must be in order. And any applications that do not follow these instructions will be considered incomplete. As you go through, double check and make sure that you have each attachment here to its corresponding document request. This is tab 2, Exhibit A, Part 1. It's very important to ensure that all of the boxes are filled out with accurate and complete information. And we also want to place emphasis on making sure the tax ID is available and the DUNS number. And you also want to make sure that the signature is placed here and dated. I'm sorry, I failed to mention in the beginning when you're submitting, if you are submitting more than 1 proposal, you're going to indicate here the priority 1, 2, or 3. Here, this is from tab 2, Exhibit A, Part 3. This shows your requested amount, your other funding sources, total project cost, etc. We will not consider applications for projects requesting greater than 80% of total project funding. So please do keep in mind. So as you'll notice, as we move further into the budget, that there's this fixed cost of $120,000 for construction management. This is tab 2, Exhibit A, Part 4. You'll want to complete this as applicable. If it is not applicable, just simply put NA there. And that will go for every section. Make sure you just address it. Tab 3, Exhibit B, Part 1. In this section, be sure to provide your anti-discrimination policy, and you also want to ensure compliance with HUD's equal access to the final rule, fair housing, VAWA, HUD Section 3, and the MWB, which was all mentioned earlier. So you'll indicate all of that here. This is tab 3, Exhibit B, Part 5. I want to bring special attention to these attachments here. B9 would be your letter of funding commitments dated no later than 6 months prior to the application. You want to make sure you have that. And also, all organizations are required to have 120 days working capital while you await reimbursement. The acceptable sources to provide are here. And if necessary, if you need to explain anything, be sure to put it here. This is tab 4, Exhibit C, Part 2. This will be where you indicate your what applies to your proposed project and the population that you will serve. And as you go along, you complete the boxes here. Let's make a note that you must be able to document site control. Additionally, property appraisals and surveys are required with supporting documentation. If it is not provided with your application, it must be provided within 30 business days. We will not send reminders. Tab 4, Exhibit C. This goes into the environmental requirements. Be sure to focus in on this information here. Christy, would you like to talk about this portion here briefly?
Sure. Sorry, I have a little frog in my throat. Sorry about that. Environmental review requirements. So in the budget, you will see, which is tab 7, A, F, F, D, and et cetera, et cetera. On line F12 of that spreadsheet, you will see environmental costs, and that is where you would put costs that would be associated with performing the environmental review. So we will be requiring, if you see this checklist, you will need to have a phase 1. If a phase 2 is triggered by that phase 1, that cost would need to be covered within your budget. And then documentation from an engineer or an environmental planner would need to be provided for each of these following 1 through 10 or 1 through 9 items, with the 10th being who that environmental planner or environmental engineer would be, so that we can get the documents from them. So just kind of be mindful about, you know, the need to put in costs that you may incur to perform or help us to perform and provide the documentation for the environmental review. There are, you know, several sites. I think we provided HUD's website on what is an environmental review, how environmental review forms and things that need to be provided. So I encourage everyone, if you're not familiar, or if you just want to brush up, to visit that HUD website that's listed right there. Candace, can you kind of circle it so people can see it? Yeah, right there above that watermark. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Appreciate it. So right underneath here is a question about whether the project will be located within the 100-year floodplain. If so, we are requesting waiver justification and what steps within that justification outline the steps you will take to mitigate. All right, let's go to the next section. Tab 4, Exhibit C, Part 4. So here's where you will fill in all the information with your development team. And you also want to ensure that the project cost estimates are provided. We may terminate the application for consideration if unavailable.
Candace, can I elaborate on that also?
Sure.
So with respect to the way that we have received information previously, there has been either typically an architect that has provided some form of assertion of what the cost estimate is. Sometimes it goes unsigned, etc. All of those details have to be in place. Also, before we proceed with any project, if it is related to either new construction or rehab, we will also do an independent cost estimate prior to any bid being opened, and that's through our cost consultant. That way we can assure that the project is reasonable, as it has a cost reasonableness to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. So before I leave this slide, just note that the contractor agreement and detailed procurement summary must be provided, and plan to review that with us prior to selecting your contractor, and note that your GC must be bonded. Also, within the attachments that's on the funding opportunities website. There's also some design standards there. For your site plan, that's required. You must reveal how the project will be built. And let me there. This is tab 4, Exhibit C, Part 5. You want to complete here in A, what type of rental project is being proposed, and you'll make your selections here. Also, you want to ensure that you have all of your units here and what goes where. If you recall, we mentioned earlier that CDBG assisted units must be 51% of all units comparable and distributed throughout every unit type. Here is tab 5, Exhibit D, Part 1. Qualified elderly developments require specialized transportation services to serve residents and ensure mobility. I also want to add here, in this section, you'll answer here, but you want to ensure that you provide details and whether or not transportation will be provided by the development owner or a third party. So detail that out here if it's for seniors. Thanks. So tab 5, Exhibit D, Part 1. Here you will describe how your project will meet or exceed the minimum standards stated in the Harris County Affordable Housing Standards. This is tab 5, Exhibit D. This is the production and expenditure schedule. It's another component to our process. Please ensure to fill this out and make it as accurate as possible. Make sure it matches your budget amounts. And please note again, as Renee has stated, our priority are for construction and acquisition ready projects. Here is Exhibit E, which is the development set-asides and incentives. You'll indicate in A what your supportive housing set-aside units will be. We'll mark that here. Additionally, ADA standards in Section 504, you'll indicate there. You'll answer about Harvey. And the one thing I want you to grab from this, if there's going to be a partnership with the Housing Authority, we will need to see evidence of that partnership. And I believe that's the very last question on this section. Hang in there, we're almost to the end here. Tab 7, Budget Summary. So this will give you an overview of all of the costs associated with the proposed project. So this will pull, as you complete tab 7, those numbers will pull and go here. You won't see anything until you complete tab 7. So all of your amounts will be listed here.
Candace, can I make a point on this tab?
Sure.
Okay. Note that for CDBG DR purposes, we really fund two things. One is acquisition, the other is construction. We do not tend to fund soft costs, financing, developer fees, and really that would be carried out with our other programs. We like to stay within the core need, which is the acquisition and construction.
This is another tab from the budget. As you complete it, you want to ensure that you indicate what source of financing, and please indicate the status. You want to let us know if it's pending, approved, or what have you. Do not leave this blank, as leverage is required and it must be an eligible source. So this is the part of the budget it's very long. If you've had a chance to review the application, as Christy mentioned about the environmental costs, line F12 will be within there along with all of the other costs. Please ensure to fill it in completely and ask questions if you're uncertain. Sorry, did anyone have anything to add? Okay, I'll go ahead and move on. This is the pro forma operating budget. Here's your rent schedule. And it's pretty similar to what I showed you earlier on Exhibit C. You just want to ensure that all of the units match. Make sure your rent schedule matches your the table on affordable. Let me go back. I'm sorry, let me go back. You want to make sure it matches, make sure the Exhibit C that I showed you earlier and the rent schedule matches here. All of those should match. Okay.
Candace, can I also touch on that? Make sure that we, any proposal that's received is conforming with the maximum rent levels that are high home rent, low home rent, and then any other variation, and do not exceed those amounts.
Thank you. So the next slide will be a few helpful tips. Make sure you have an active SAM account and DUNS number. Read your application several times. As I mentioned earlier, the application instructions, the quick reference guide, and all of the reference tabs. Please do not wait until the last minute to begin completing and compiling information. That's very important. You're more than likely to miss something if you wait, and we can definitely tell. All items on the budget, make sure it directly supports the program. Use your budget summary for details. Double check your numbers for accuracy. Make sure your budget is consistent and not overstated with your proposed activity and grant term. Make sure you answer all of the questions and attach all requested documentation. Do not include extra information. Please stick to the application guidelines. And as I mentioned earlier, if it's not applicable, please simply place NA in that corresponding box. Before you apply, clear any delinquent property tax issues, any audit findings. If there is some audit findings, please explain, and you'll see in, I believe it's tab 2, I believe, in B, we ask for that information. We also will check to see if your federal department will want to ensure, you'll want to ensure that you have good standing with the Texas Secretary of State and that you have your evidence of financial capacity and working capital. Please submit your application before the deadline. We will not accept any late applications. 2 p.m., I believe, is the deadline, so please adhere. Here is the schedule. The last day for assistance from CSD staff will be May 27th before 4:30. Our RFA deadline to submit your application is June 16th at 2 p.m. at our office, listed at this address here. And here is my contact information. I'll hold it for just a few seconds before I open up for questions. At this time, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. We have about 11 minutes remaining in the presentation.
For questions, we just asked if you please use your reaction feature button in the Teams and raise your hand, and we'll answer all questions. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
We were unable to open the actual application.
We're still waiting for any information to get into the application program.
What you just went over just now, we're unable to go online and open it. It won't let us in. So this was my first time really being able to see it, how it is online.
Okay. And I'll show you how to access.
Unable
To hear you.
Okay. Yes. I will get with you and show you how to access the application.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Candace. I apologize. Somebody was talking. I just said that phone number you just flashed. Was that yours? What is that? For assistance, it said till tomorrow. I mean, till 27th.
Yes. So that number is 832-927-4989. And I'll leave it in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Renee, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I saw a hand raised. Now, okay, it went down.
Great.
There's a hand. Miss Woods,
Hi,
you're recognized.
as this relates into, we're doing an acquisition. We have using some 4% credits. So are you saying that we need to have credits awarded as we're doing leveraging for our financing, or how do we do that in relationship if we are seeking tax credit awards?
In terms of tax credits, where are you with your bonds? I know that last year bonds were completely oversubscribed. That led to the inability to use the 4% tax credits. Is your projected closing and anything associated with the financing on the equity in line with our need to start the project as soon as we can, meaning starting in the fall? Because we have such a short time frame. The
Okay.
DR money is going to be at 24 months in August. So
Okay.
I would just, evaluate where y'all are on your ability to intersect tax credit financing and equity with our need to have a construction and a acquisition ready project.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions?
See a hand, Mr. and Mrs. Simone, you're recognized.
Yes. We wanted to know if the opportunity for a mobile home park was something that you guys would consider in this round for single housing.
What's the nature of it? And Christy, maybe you want to weigh in also.
Well, what we were trying to do is, get that 1 acre and put at least 20 brand new HUD approved. I mean, they have excellent ones now. I've kind of had a meeting or two with some of the providers here in Houston, and we really wanted to make it more than just 51%, 100% for the low income. And as far as getting it shovel ready, it would not take long. They told me that 3 to 4 months we would have the 20 units, completed,
underground, electric, water, service ready to
work
brand new
with
homes,
ready to work with the HUD program. I'm sorry, with the voucher program, Section 8, to get the people into homes within less than a year.
They would have their own yard, the whole 9 yards.
Are these units that would be like modular housing and affixed to the ground?
Yes, they would be modular homes. We were thinking 3 and 4
4
bedrooms
bedrooms.
because that's the most needed from my
Understood.
research. But yes, they would be modular homes set on the ground, and of course, we would definitely get the project would not be in a 100-year. We would try to get the best area for flooding, and my understanding with the level 2 house that we were projecting to have for this for single home, the wind factors and everything was excellent. We spoke with Clayton Homes, and they are very familiar with HUD and all the programs that you guys offer, and they have they said that everything that they have in that section 2 is 100% how do you say exactly what's needed far as the housing structures and the rules and regulations and guidelines that you guys need to approve that housing.
Okay. Chrissy, do you have any comments on this?
It is allowable under the DR program. We have several mobile home parks that we've dealt with. One thing that you would be mindful of for your timeline is the getting of that permit for a mobile home is not the same as getting it for a standardized single, kind of a single family home rental unit that would be constructed. So just be mindful in your timeline for anyone who is considering that type of housing structure, that permits it's a little bit more involved.
We're familiar with it.
with it.
We've actually have done a smaller program that's involving modular homes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Are there any more questions? Brian is asking, will this recording be shared? So, Renee, will you be sharing the recording?
I don't see why we couldn't post the recording.
Hey, I do have a question if time allocates. My name is Valerie James. I am with Veteran Advocate Services and Training. We work with veterans who are homeless and incarcerated. We transition them from homelessness to housing. And we also transition them from jail. We're in the jail 2 times a week, working with 100 veterans who are, thank God, in one pod, so we can work with them together at the same time. Just inquiring, I think I saw where it said, and we work to try and get, there's such issues with getting people who have backgrounds and getting people who have low income housed. So we're putting together some housing units. But I thought I saw in your presentation where it said in Harris County, but outside of Houston. Is that accurate?
We work inside the city for homeless related, but there would have to be a commitment from the city to also jointly fund a project. So, I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and I said, where would you be on with that tandem approach with the city? That's why I made that caveat earlier about just how would that be brought to bear of looking at a project inside the city if there's no certainty that the city has the funding or the commitment to fund. So that would be the consideration there.
Okay. One of the good things that we've seen that help people from going back and forth into the revolving door of jail and homelessness is we bring on-site wraparound services like sobriety and mental health on-site. I'm interested in this program. I would like to know who I can maybe speak to a little more to make sure we are a perfect fit for it, because we have a lot of people we help on a daily basis. We
would need to have a conversation with the city to see where they would be on program. Right now, they're going through some challenges with their CDBG DR program. I don't know what they would have relative home. So just submit your comments to us, and that's something that we would have to look at further.
So do you work with, oh, go ahead. I think Mr. Hughes had a comment.
I want to make sure we understand the nature of your comment. So are you asking about building units, or are you asking about wraparound services, or both?
Well, we have the wraparound services, so I'm talking about funding if we were to build units, or is this just for building of units, the funding we're talking about here, or is it for units existing? It's for building them, correct?
Not necessarily just for building them. If we did permanent supportive housing, those units could be already in existence. You could acquire them and have programming. So that is still eligible activity under Home ARP.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Because it's funny, I was just telling someone, one of the people I work with about, he said he has places in Spring, and I kept saying no, for the veterans we probably need it closer in Houston. So we probably do have properties that would work for both.
I will say
the outside.
I will say that if that is the interest, again, because I feel like you peaked up on the veteran part of this, and that is an eligible or qualified population under Home ARP. With that, there's significant monitoring requirements, as 70% of the funds must be spent on the qualified population. So throughout if you acquired those units, you would have to make sure, or if you set aside those units, you have to make sure that there was always a veteran or someone in the qualified population in the units.
Okay, that's wonderful. And that would be something I could share through the email that y'all provided, right, to talk more?
You can ask more questions about the various funding sources, yes, through the email.
And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and Don, thank you for those comments. I think that was great. The thing that I want to make sure that everybody is also cognizant of is that relative construction, we have very strict limits on the use of the space. This cannot necessarily be space that is also used for the general public. So, for example, if it is, let's say, homeless related services space, is it strictly for the tenants? That's one of the questions that GLO will even ask us on projects, and we have to then go through an allocation. Home funds can only be used for residential as well. So there are just some things to consider when you are working through who are going to be the users of your project.
Thank you.
Great. We are, excuse me, we are now at slightly past our time. Before we sign off, do we have any more questions? If not, we want to thank you all so much for your time and your interest. For additional questions or any more comments or concerns, I would ask that you please send those to rfp@csd.hctx.net, and we will take questions up until Friday, May 27th before 4:30.
Hey, just great presentation. I appreciate y'all time. Thank you.
If anyone needed that email address again, if you go back in the chat, there's the messages in there that says rfp@csd.hctx.net, and I can paste it again. Thank you for posting it before, Candace.
Yes, sure. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for participating today.
Bye-bye.